Hello everyone, this is my first YouTube video and I thought I'd talk about this camera I just bought a couple of days ago, and I thought I'd make a video of it because with all the interesting material I always find when I'm looking for information and when I want to learn something, maybe this experience might be useful to someone else, and so off we go. I recently, well, a couple of days ago, maybe a week, I bought this Pentax ME. This is a camera that was built in the second half of starting from the second half of the 70s, of the 1970s. And it's a very, very compact SLR camera. And one of the first to use the Pentax K mount. So there we go, a little bit of history. It comes in a chrome version or a black version, so there's also some aesthetic choices that can be made if you're in the market for one of these. What makes it really interesting for me is the price. I bought it for 15 euro, overbidding, by the way. The asking price was 10 on a Facebook group, so I just thought I'd offer 50% more and bring it home right away. Mostly because I was interested in the lens. This is a SMC Pentax f1.7 50mm, made in Japan, if that's of any concern or interest to anyone. It's a solid lens. I have another one, by the way, so this is mainly why this camera caught my attention, because I wanted to substitute, an extra version of this lens in case one breaks, as I had happened with other lenses, or just as a backup. This one unfortunately has a pretty serious dent on that affects the thread where you would be screwing filters in, or sun cap, I guess. So unfortunately that makes it kind of unusable. But other than that, the lens is in very good conditions. The lens was standard on this camera, the ME. So when I saw it for sale, I was mostly interested in the lens. For 10 or 15 euro, I said, I can't really go wrong. Plus there's a really elaborate back cap to my lens, which is actually doubles as a camera, as you can see. So my main focus wasn't the camera, but I'm happy to have it because I'm going to be testing it out pretty soon, and hopefully I'll have some interesting pictures to share. But for now, let's just see the camera I got and what you can expect, I guess, for a 15 euro investment in old vintage equipment. So the camera is really compact, as I was saying. Just for giggles, we can compare it to, here we have the ME versus a K50. The K50 is mounting the same lens, by the way, so just the version without a broken thread, and you can definitely see there's a difference, right, in width at least. So this is compared to an already compact DSLR, so it's not bad. But even more interesting, if you were the kind of person that was into old Nintendo DS's at the time, here's the comparison with the DS. The body is just slightly wider than a DS, and you see, it's really more or less the same size. Meaning, if you could carry a DS in your pocket without complaining or finding it quite convenient or comfortable, you could definitely carry a Pentax ME. So off goes the DS. As I mentioned before, it's one of the first cameras to implement the K mount. So if that's your style, you can definitely use newer lenses on it. If this is, the way you like your camera to be. Although, of course, autofocus will not be working. So there you go, but it's the same mount. Now let's see a little more about the camera. It has a cocking lever for advancing the film for a new picture, shutter, of course, shutter release button. It has this locking wheel where you can select different modes. So you have a lock mode at the top. Basically, the camera is prevented from firing. You have an auto mode, which is the natural mode for the camera. This camera, by the way, is aperture priority, so you don't really have control on the shutter speed. This basically is the camera's operating mode, and it enables you to shoot with the camera automatically metering for the shutter speed. You then have a 100x mode, which is basically, if this lever turns, this wheel is a little hard to maneuver. It might be just my camera though. 100x syncs camera to flash at a speed of 1/100th of a second, from what I understood. I haven't tested this camera out though, so take everything with a grain of salt. And then you have a bulb mode. Bulb, of course, meaning that the shutter will stay open as long as the shutter release is engaged. So long exposure, it's covered. Flash is semi-covered. Auto mode is covered. And the camera won't go off in your pocket if you keep it on lock. Always on the right-hand side of the camera, you have a, lens release button, pretty standard, I guess, and a timer. So you prepare your next shot, cock the timer lever. I'm not sure this is by design, or if it's just my model that might be not working too well, but you kind of have to tap it to get the timer going. But once it runs, and it'll shoot. There we go. So selfies covered too. On the left hand of the camera, looking from behind, you have, the rewind mechanism for film. You have ASA or ISO controls, so you can set the camera depending on what film you're using on the ISO or ASA of the film you're using. So you have a range that goes between 12, I believe. Let's see. Have a range that goes between 12. I'm not sure you can read that. 12 and 1600. Oh, man. Well, this is a little tricky because in order to change the settings for the ISO, you have to lift this the external part of the wheel, which doesn't really lift a lot, so sometimes it's a little bit hard to turn. But once lifted, it should move the wheel with the ISO settings. If you don't lift this external silvery crown, you're controlling exposure compensation. So once you set your ISO, once you set your aperture through the lens, you can then adjust for exposure compensation. So you have 4 different settings to compensate. So that kind of gives you a little bit of manual control. Moving on to the inside, we have, to open the film compartment, you lift the wheel and just pry it open. It's pretty easy. You might notice this gunk paste, old gum. One of the issues is that the foam the cameras used originally to light-proof the film chamber degraded really quickly, or pretty quickly, I guess, considering the time. Considering they're pretty old cameras. So people have had to resort to some form of alternative measures to keep them light-proof. So in this case, someone decided to use this paste. I'm not sure what it is. When I test the camera, if it's light-proof, I'll just keep the paste the way it is. If not, I'll clean it and find some other way, maybe a little less unappealing than this paste. But let's see how the camera actually works. Let's see the shutter. There's a shutter cover, a first cover, as you can see, with these 2 diagonal bars. This lifts once you cock the mechanism, There we go. Now the camera's ready to fire. And you then have these blades. They're kind of asymmetrically cut. I mean, it's not a regular cut. And if anyone knows why that is, I would be really curious to know, by the way. Because it is a little interesting quirk. And I'm sure there's a reason for it, So, here we go. Once you fire, the screen opens and then both screens come back down. So, pretty basic, I would say. Now once you close your... the Viewfinder has... I'm not sure we'll be able to see very much of it, but... well, it has the split screen, like the split circle to assist focusing, manual focusing. So when the two halves of the object you're focusing on come to be perfectly aligned, you know, that part of the image is in focus. That's a really big help if you're into manual focus. And it then has, you might be able to see it, yeah, you can see a red dot. There's an overlay in the viewfinder with all the shutter speed options, which go from 8 seconds to 1/1000th of a second. And the camera will, when you press the shutter button halfway down, the camera will highlight which shutter speed it has selected for optimal exposure with a little red light. The only way you have to modify the shutter speed is to either remove the battery, which will lock the camera at 1/125th of a second, or change your aperture settings. So yeah, there are some limitations in the manual use you can make of this camera, but still, for its size, for its price, and you know, for its historical value, I would say, to an extent, you can't get a better buy than this. Lens and camera for €15. I've seen online people have bought it for less at thrift shops and you know, markets and stuff. Keep your eyes peeled, and it's not only Pentax, it's not this model. This is just what I bought by chance, but you know, by today's standards, prices on a lot of vintage gear, unless you're going for the collector's items, but everything else is so low that you have so much opportunity to play around with different gear, with old gear, with so many different things that whether it works for you or not, whether this is just a piece of crap you're going to throw away next week, whether the lens itself works or doesn't, the experience you gain from being able to hold it, play with it, unscrew it, take it apart, or you know, do whatever you want with it, is going to be so useful in the long run that if you consider this basically cost a fraction of a Friday night out partying, it really makes sense to sometimes indulge in, you don't need to know everything. You'll learn, you can research. There's so much information available even on the crappiest camera that I think the experience you gain is invaluable. And I hope to be able to bring, you know, some pictures as soon as I test it out and see if it's working, see if I can, you know, if it all works out, if nothing's blurry or compromised. I hope to bring some pictures in some next video so that, you know, you can see how it works and if this is some kind of toy that might work for you or not. Considering it's a toy that, you know, has a f1.7 lens to it, which is definitely not a bad thing to have. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this is useful. If you have any questions or, you know, something to say, just mention it in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And hopefully see you soon with some new, with some possibly pictures from this little baby. Have a nice day, everyone, and thanks for watching.